In a single day of fighting, dozens of unmanned aerial vehicles were shot down. Several tanks and rocket launchers were destroyed, and one key Russian fire support link vanished in just seconds. This was not a battle that redrew the map, but it revealed a much deeper shift unfolding across the Ukrainian battlefield. The outcome of modern combat is no longer decided by how many tanks or artillery systems stand on the line, but by who controls the low sky above it. Russian forces launched dense waves of UAVs with a clear goal: overload Ukrainian defenses and hunt down the drone networks guiding strikes on the ground. Ukrainian units were not caught off guard. Radar, reconnaissance drones, and ground observers tracked the approach early, while countermeasures were activated both in the air and on the battlefield itself. The danger here goes far beyond the loss of equipment. Once one side loses control of low-altitude airspace, mobility collapses. Resupply slows. Attacks lose coordination. Entire operations can stall before they even begin. What makes this moment stand out is the imbalance it exposes. Cheap drones costing a fraction of traditional weapons are now capable of neutralizing systems worth millions, cutting through armor, artillery, and logistics with speed and precision. The bigger question remains unanswered. Are large-scale Russian UAV assaults still capable of breaking defenses, or are they now exposing critical weaknesses that modern drone warfare is ready to exploit? Russian forces launched large groups of UAVs with the clear intent to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses and locate the drone units directing strikes on the ground. These were not isolated flights or probing missions. Multiple drones moved along similar routes and altitudes, pushing forward at the same time to test how much pressure the Ukrainian network could absorb. The logic was simple. If enough drones entered the airspace together, some would slip through, expose hidden operators, or force defenders to reveal their positions. Ukrainian units did not wait for impact to react. Radar coverage, reconnaissance drones, and ground observation posts began tracking the movement early, building a picture of the incoming wave before it reached the front line. This early awareness changed the flow of the engagement. Instead of reacting to sudden contacts, operators already knew the direction, speed, and density of the approaching UAVs. That preparation allowed responses to be timed rather than rushed. Once the drones entered contested airspace, the battlefield stopped behaving like a place of surprise attacks. It turned into a contest of detection and reaction speed. Each Russian UAV that crossed a monitored sector added data instead of confusion. Paths overlapped. Flight patterns repeated. Small adjustments became visible when viewed as part of a group rather than as single targets. The attempt to flood the sky created its own weakness, since concentration made tracking easier instead of harder. As the engagement developed, Ukrainian responses came in layers. Some drones were challenged in the air, while others were followed until their control points or supporting elements became clear. Ground observers played a key role by confirming movement and identifying low-altitude approaches that radar alone might miss. The defense was not focused on destroying everything at once. It was about breaking the rhythm of the attack and forcing each drone to operate under pressure. The most striking feature of this phase was the shift away from one-on-one encounters. Russian UAVs increasingly moved in clusters, likely to share routes and timing. That choice carried risks. When one drone was detected, nearby units often became visible as well. Instead of creating chaos, the clustered approach narrowed the decision space for attackers. Ukrainian teams could prioritize zones rather than chase individual contacts, which improved coordination across sectors. This back and forth revealed how quickly the role of UAVs has changed. Drones were not only tools for striking targets. They became signals that shaped the fight itself. Every launch exposed intent. Every movement left traces. The side that processed those signals faster gained control over the tempo of the battle. By the end of this phase, it was clear that the outcome did not depend on how many UAVs were launched, but on how well their movement was managed under observation. The sky above the front was no longer empty space waiting to be crossed. It had become a monitored zone where density could work against the attacker. That reality leads to an uncomfortable question that hangs over this engagement. When defenders can see incoming waves from the start, does launching more drones still create advantage? Or does it simply make the next step easier to predict? The involvement of F-16 fighters in this phase signals that low-altitude defense is no longer limited to ground-based systems. Ukrainian aircraft were recorded engaging a Russian Lancet drone during the broader UAV assault, and this moment marked a shift in how air defense is applied across the battlefield. A manned fighter was operating inside the same detection and response network used by drones and ground observers, which shows that air power is now woven directly into counter-UAV operations, rather than held back for separate missions. This change reshaped the immediate flow of the engagement. Once a fighter appeared as part of the defense, the low sky stopped being a predictable space for attacking drones. Lancet systems rely on controlled approach paths and stable tracking to strike armored or artillery targets. The presence of fast-moving aircraft disrupted that logic. Operators could no longer assume that flying at certain heights or angles would avoid interception. Each second in the air carried more risk than before. As the battle continued, the effect became visible in drone behavior. Russian UAVs began adjusting routes and timing in response to the threat. Some moved lower, hugging terrain and buildings, while others slowed down to reduce detection. These changes were not improvements. Flying lower narrowed maneuver space and increased exposure to ground fire. Slower movement extended time inside defended zones. Attempts to change approach angles often forced drones into areas already covered by observers. The key point is that the fighter did not act alone. Radar cues, drone feeds, and visual confirmation from the ground shaped when and where the interception occurred. The aircraft became another layer in a system that was already tracking the sky in detail. This layered structure reduced gaps that attacking drones usually exploit. Instead of slipping through a single defense, UAVs now faced overlapping threats that reacted at different speeds. This also created pressure on the attacking side to make decisions earlier. Operators had to choose between speed and concealment, while knowing that either option could draw attention. When drones flew higher to gain range and guidance stability, they risked detection by aircraft. When they stayed low to hide, they faced small arms fire and short-range defenses. The space for safe movement continued to shrink as the engagement unfolded. From a tactical view, the fighter presence forced Russian planners to rethink how UAV waves are timed. Launching drones too close together increased the chance that aircraft could reach the area in time. Spreading them out reduced pressure on defenders and weakened coordination. Neither option delivered the clean breakthrough that mass UAV use aims to achieve. This phase also highlighted a limit. Using fighters for drone interception is demanding and cannot replace cheaper defenses in every case. Aircraft fuel, pilot fatigue, and airframe risk all matter. Still, the message sent during this clash was clear. Low-altitude airspace is contested by more than one layer, and attackers must now account for fast manned platforms as part of the response. The result was not a sudden collapse of UAV attacks, but a steady erosion of confidence in their freedom of movement. Every launch carried more uncertainty, and every route required adjustment under pressure. That reality raises a question that remains open. Should fighters continue to hunt drones as part of routine defense? Or is this role only effective during specific moments when the balance on the battlefield demands it? The third phase of the fight shows that FPV drones are no longer used only to strike ground targets, but to hunt other drones in the air. Ukrainian FPV units began tracking and chasing Russian UAVs as part of the same battle rhythm, which changed how the low sky functioned during the engagement. These drones did not wait for enemy systems to reach armored columns or artillery positions. They moved early, climbed into likely flight paths, and followed incoming UAVs until contact was made. The result was a direct contest in the air, where speed, control, and timing mattered more than payload size. As this pattern repeated, the battlefield gained a new layer of pressure. The low-altitude zone turned into a space where drones could no longer travel freely, because every movement risked being intercepted by another unmanned system. Russian UAV operators faced a growing problem. Each launch now carried the chance of meeting a defender that was smaller, faster, and already positioned along the route. This removed the sense of safety that once came from flying below traditional air defense coverage. FPV drones proved effective in this role because of their flexibility. They could launch within minutes, change direction quickly, and respond to updated information from observers on the ground. When a hostile UAV was spotted, the response did not require complex coordination. A nearby FPV team could be tasked immediately, closing distance before the target reached its objective. This short reaction cycle made interception possible, even against drones that were already deep into contested airspace. The effect on large-scale UAV attacks became visible as the clash continued. When attacking drones began to disappear before reaching targets, the pressure on Ukrainian ground units eased. Artillery crews faced fewer incoming strikes. Armored vehicles gained more freedom to move. Command posts were less exposed. The value of mass launches declined when a growing share of drones failed to complete their mission. What looked powerful on paper became fragile in practice once the air was contested at close range. This shift also forced changes in how Russian UAVs operated. Some tried to fly lower and closer to terrain to avoid detection. Others attempted wider routes that added time and complexity. Neither approach solved the problem. Flying low increased the risk of losing control or striking obstacles. Longer paths gave defenders more chances to react. Each adjustment traded one weakness for another, which reduced the overall impact of the attack. The most important point is cost and scale. FPV drones are simple and cheap compared to many attack UAVs. Losing one defender is not decisive, while losing an attacking drone often ends a mission. This imbalance favors the side using FPVs as interceptors. It allows pressure to be applied continuously without exhausting resources. The airspace becomes saturated with defenders rather than attackers, which flips the logic of mass assaults. Over time, this dynamic changed expectations on both sides. Launching more drones did not guarantee success. It sometimes increased losses by making patterns easier to see. The low sky became a place of constant risk rather than a corridor of opportunity. That reality leads to a broader question that remains unanswered. As FPVs take on defensive roles in the air, will future drone forces focus more on protecting space than striking targets? Or will attackers find a way to break through this new layer of cheap and fast interception? The fourth phase makes it clear that movement on the ground has turned from an advantage into a liability under constant aerial watch. Russian armored units pushed forward with T-72 tanks as part of the same pressure cycle created by the UAV assault. And the vehicles advanced carefully while firing towards suspected Ukrainian positions. The tanks did not rush. They paused, adjusted angles, and tried to use terrain and vegetation for cover. Even with this caution, repeated anti-tank strikes followed once their routes and firing points became clear. Each hit reduced mobility and narrowed options until one vehicle was finally disabled and destroyed after several impacts. The sequence showed how armor loses value once its position is fixed under observation. At the same time, Ukrainian T-64 tanks operated under a different rhythm. These vehicles moved, fired, and repositioned while under artillery pressure, which limited the window for counterstrikes. Instead of holding ground, the crews focused on timing. Shots were delivered quickly, and withdrawal began before return fire could settle. This pattern did not depend on heavy protection. It relied on awareness and coordination with observers who warned when exposure increased. The result was survival through motion, rather than endurance through armor. As the armored fight unfolded, Russian infantry attempted to regain tempo by switching to light mobility. Small groups mounted motorcycles and ATVs to close distance faster and avoid predictable paths. On open ground, this approach looked bold. Speed reduced time under artillery threat and allowed flexible routes between cover. Yet this choice created a new problem once drones entered the picture. Light vehicles produced clear visual signals, and their lack of protection left no margin once detected. FPV drones responded almost immediately. Operators tracked the moving groups, followed their paths, and struck as soon as distance closed. Some riders tried to scatter. Others abandoned vehicles and ran for nearby cover. These reactions came too late. The drones adjusted faster than the infantry could move, and each strike broke the group into smaller and weaker elements. What began as a fast approach turned into a series of isolated targets with no ability to regroup. This pattern repeated across the sector. Light assaults that depended on speed lost effectiveness once the airspace above them stayed active. Movement drew attention rather than avoiding it. Vehicles meant to reduce exposure instead created it. The faster the push, the sooner it was seen. The logic that once favored rapid advance collapsed under constant tracking. The combined effect on Russian operations was severe. Armor hesitated after seeing how quickly positions were marked. Infantry slowed once light mobility failed. Coordination suffered as units waited for safer moments that never appeared. Each delay gave defenders more time to prepare and more chances to strike. The ground fight lost momentum, even without a decisive engagement. What stands out is not the destruction itself, but the sequence that led to it. Detection came first. Fixation followed. Then precision strikes arrived when movement stalled or clustered. This chain punished any attempt to rely on speed alone. By the end of this phase, the message was hard to ignore. On a battlefield watched from above at all times, moving faster does not mean moving safer. The destruction of the BM-21 Grad marked a clear breaking point in the fire support chain during this phase of the battle. The launcher was not moving or firing when it was struck. It had stopped in a tree line area while waiting for reload and refuel vehicles, which is a routine step after a fire mission. Ukrainian surveillance drones had already been watching the area, tracking the launcher from the moment it completed its salvo. Once the vehicle remained stationary, an FPV drone was directed toward it with precision timing. The strike came without warning, hitting the launcher while rockets were still on board. The impact triggered a secondary explosion that erased the entire system within seconds. Rockets detonated one after another, turning the launcher into a fireball that could be seen across the sector. There was no opportunity for the crew to react or relocate. What mattered was not only the physical loss of the vehicle, but the sudden collapse of a fire support node that had been active just moments earlier. A BM-21 Grad rarely operates on its own, because it is usually deployed as part of a wider artillery group that includes other launchers, support guns, supply vehicles, and coordinated command elements. When one launcher is destroyed in this way, the effect spreads beyond the crater it leaves behind. Planned fire missions are canceled. Coordination with neighboring units breaks down. Gaps appear in coverage that cannot be filled immediately. The battlefield feels quieter, but that silence reflects a loss of pressure rather than a pause. This shift was felt almost immediately. Without the Grad providing rapid saturation fire, Ukrainian positions faced less indirect threat. Movement became easier. Units could reposition with lower risk. The balance of tempo tilted, as one side lost its ability to shape the fight from a distance. What had been a source of constant pressure vanished in a single moment because it could not hide from the sky. The aftermath did not stop with one strike. As attention shifted, other Russian systems began to come under pressure. Self-propelled guns like the Akatsiya that attempted to fire and displace were detected and targeted during their movement windows. Armored vehicles that tried to cover retreats drew drone attention once they entered open ground. Infantry groups that pulled back toward tree lines or ruins found that escape routes were already being watched. Each attempt to reorganize exposed another piece of the force to observation. The pattern followed a familiar sequence. Detection came first through persistent surveillance. Fixation followed when vehicles slowed or stopped. Precision strikes arrived once timing favored the attacker. This sequence repeated without the need for mass firepower. Small unmanned systems carried the burden of disruption, while ground units adjusted based on the openings created. The loss of the Grad amplified every step because it removed a tool that might have suppressed these responses. What stands out in this phase is how fragile heavy fire support becomes when it depends on short pauses to function. Reloading and refueling are unavoidable tasks. In an environment watched from above, these moments turn into vulnerabilities. The Grad was not defeated by counter-battery fire or direct engagement. It was removed by a cheap drone that exploited stillness. By the end of this stage, the message was unmistakable. Firepower that cannot move unseen cannot survive. Once a launcher stops under observation, it risks becoming the next link to break. The destruction of the BM-21 did not just end one threat. It exposed how modern battlefields punish any system that relies on concealment without control of the air. What happened in this single sequence of fighting delivers a blunt message that is hard to ignore. The battlefield in Ukraine is no longer shaped by who brings more tanks or heavier artillery, but by who controls the low sky and dictates the pace of action below it. Dense UAV attacks, fighter interceptions, FPV drone hunting, collapsing armored pushes, and the sudden loss of a BM-21 Grad all point to the same conclusion. Now moves in tight cycles of detection, fixation, precision strike, and rapid consolidation on the ground. These events followed a pattern that is repeating across multiple sectors. Cheap drones spot targets. Other drones strike them. Ground forces move only after the threat is removed. Expensive systems that stop, reload, or hesitate become vulnerable in minutes. The published loss numbers may carry a political message, but they still reflect a real shift. Cost no longer equals power, and price does not guarantee survival. The real question is not how many UAVs each side can launch next. Can Russian forces protect fire support systems and restore safe movement under constant surveillance? Or will drones continue to shrink every window for action? The answer is still open. That uncertainty is exactly what makes this moment matter. If these questions deserve attention, hit like, share this video, and subscribe to Military Force for clear reporting on modern weapons, real battles, and the politics behind them.